here with Penny Chesney. She's an incredible local shaman and healer, and she was one of the leading healers and speakers and also readers at this year's Wellbeing Festival in Byron Bay, Bangalore. So welcome, Penny.
Thank you, Gabby.
Now, Penny, can you tell us a little bit about your incredible grief recovery treatments and how you first got started doing the work that you're doing in that regard?
Well, after the loss of my son in 1987, I, of course, like everybody else, believed that I had really lost my son. However, I certainly went through a lot of very, very interesting grief recovery. I was very fortunate that there was a practitioner, a Russian doctor of parapsychology, who was living in the village near where my farm was in Tasmania, and he took me through a 6-week course in grief recovery, and miraculous things happened. I was always a very logical woman. I noticed that he used colour, visualisation, altered state journeying, but literally miracles happened. However, I still was under the impression that my son had gone and he wasn't part of my life anymore. I was also in a situation where I was bringing up my orphaned daughter, who was the only survivor of that accident. So I was a confused, grieving mum who was experiencing deep loss. And because my granddaughter had had a lot of permanent injuries associated with the accident, she had to have corrective surgery over the years. 8 years after the accident, I was exhausted. I'd just taken her through a whole heap of corrective surgery, and I'd been on deck 24/7 for 18 months straight, and I came down with pneumonia and I couldn't shift it. 6 weeks I had it. My doctor was trying to get me to go into hospital. I didn't have a backup team. We hadn't been up here for very long. It wasn't a possibility. I had a child and a whole heap of animals, and I just didn't know what to do. And in desperation, I booked in with a woman who was a Reiki practitioner, a master, a teacher. And during that treatment, I had a vision in which my son came to me, he hugged me, he told me that the worst was over now, and then he changed into a pillar of emerald green light. He went up, I knew exactly what was happening. He went up over my head in a big arch, and he came down into the crown chakra of the woman who was working on me. And it felt exactly as though I had corks that had popped out of the instep of both feet. Wow. And energy was roaring through my feet. But that was the most amazing thing. It felt as though my body was full of dirty bath water. And I could actually feel the level of it going down slowly, 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 as it was all roaring out of the soles of my feet. And it didn't take long, and as soon as it was all over and done with, this lady took her hands off, and the interesting thing was I never once fell asleep during that. I was awake the whole time, but it was like I was in 2 different places, because this lady was pressing rather hard on my eyes, and my head was being pushed back at an uncomfortable angle, so I couldn't just relax and go to sleep. So it was like a dual reality. I had the uncomfortable body laying on the Reiki table, but some part of me was in this place where I met up with my son. So as soon as she took her hands off, I just sat straight up. I was back in my body, and I sat up. I knew I was cured of pneumonia, completely cured. And I just started raving straight away without looking at this lady, because I had my back turned to her. And I was saying, that was marvellous, that was fantastic, I'm cured, etc. And there was silence, and I swung my legs over the side and had a look, and she was sitting there as white as a ghost and shaking. And I called her husband, and we wrapped her in a doona and got her a glass of brandy and got her out onto the veranda in the sunshine. And it took about 5 minutes before she could talk to us, and she said that she knew that I was cured. She said that she couldn't accept any credit for it, because she said as soon as she put her hands over my eyes, she was taken over by an ascended master who did the treatment. And I went, oh, ascended master, that was my boy Andrew. And it completely changed my whole reality after that, because I had already trained in level 1 in Reiki, but after that then I went on and I learned a lot of other things. I went on to level 2 and I learned, say, Sham, and I was already on a shamanic journey without even realising it. I'd already been a visionary for quite some time, and it was a very difficult path because I didn't have the information I needed. I mean, so I found it all out, but the thing that was interesting is as soon as I had my first grief recovery, serious grief recovery client, who wanted to, she was somebody I knew, and I knew them both. I knew her husband before he died, and they were very, very, very close friends. And I hadn't seen this lady for 2.25 years, and then I ran into her in town, and I hardly recognised her. She was a pretty gutsy lady, you know, what you would call a real pioneer before that she lost her husband. And she'd changed into this frail little old lady in that period of time, and I said to her, you know, how are you? And she said, oh, it's been really hard, and so I talked her into coming up. She said she'd been going to grief recovery, and I asked if that had helped, and she actually said, I don't know. She said, I think it might be sometimes I have an hour or two when I'm feeling okay. And so I talked her into coming up. And because I do a fair bit of work beforehand before a client arrives, I was in a particularly receptive state as soon as she came through the door. As soon as I put my hands on her, I knew that her husband was with her, as clear as a bell. He had never gone anywhere. And also, I became very aware that my son Andrew was also there. And it was interesting because when this man was alive, he was an engineer, he was a really interesting man, highly intelligent. And I used to say to him, oh, I wish you'd been able to meet my son Andrew. And there they were, chatting away to one another. And I was thinking, well, this is what I always envisaged in the first place. So then I had a bit of a laugh, because here in Australia, you know, the division of the sexes of parties and things, because her husband and Andrew's spirit actually moved away from the table at that point of time, and they moved into the kitchen, still in line of sight. And here I was with my hands on the wife, and I was thinking, isn't that typical? Isn't that just so typical? The men are in the kitchen near the barrel, and the women are in the lounge room chatting. And then when they came back towards the table, then I was just left my body. I wasn't there anymore. When this happens to me, something else takes me over, and I'm gone, and I'm somewhere else, usually in this place which is just like clouds, and I was just sitting there patiently waiting. Then I'm brought back at the end of the treatment, and I was aware of the fact that it was just my client and myself. And she came out of it, she was just absolutely amazed. And the first thing I said to her, I said, well, one of your problems, Gwen, was the fact that you let him go. He just stayed, and because they were deeply in love, these two, even though they were, you know, getting on a bit, they really were the world's greatest lovers. They walked everywhere hand in hand, and he used to choose her clothes for her. And anyway, so I just said to her, he never went anywhere, and she just, straight away, she said, oh my God, thank God for that. She said, I thought I was going mad. This is one thing I couldn't talk to anybody, because she said, I feel him getting into bed with me at night. She said, I hear the squeak of his chair at the table when I sit for a meal. She said, I thought I had gone mad. And I said, no, Gwen, he just loved you so much. And she said, I'm aware of that. She said, I know. She asked me who was the handsome young blonde man that was talking to her husband.
Wow, so she saw your son.
She actually saw my son quite well, yes.
That's incredible.
And then she said there was a discussion, because this was where I was kicked out of my body.